Now, these models that we're building in our imagination have several different steps along the way as somebody's playing a game. There's the metaphor. And in games, I never metaphor I didn't like. Metaphors are just richly enveloping us. All the way back to the early, GUI computer, where we decided that we would wrap a simple metaphor that was approachable to people to understand these complex tasks. Because underneath the hood of the computer, you really don't want the users to understand what's going on under the hood. If you can find a simpler way for them to understand it in terms that they already know. So from a very early stage, we were embracing metaphor in the computers that we kind of brought into games. And that's really what games are this simple wrapping on top of a much more complex system. A lot of games really, they're presented in terms of metaphors. So SimCity, in most people's mind, is kind of an interactive train set, or The Sims, an interactive dollhouse. But metaphors really come because we start noticing two things, and we start seeing patterns. At first it might be a very diffuse pattern, but over time we start, extracting that pattern up, and saying, what we call schema. Now, schema are looking at a lot of examples and extracting an underlying pattern and building an abstraction of that pattern, which we can then kind of label. We can put symbols on that. But the schema that we build are from a lot of play and interactive experiences. We collect these schema together over time, and they come in all these different kind of directions. You've all heard the light bulb joke. So in your head somewhere you have the schema for the way the light bulb joke goes. And this is what happens whenever you experience something that has an underlying pattern, is that you're slowly building a schema over time. Some schema are classification schema. If you imagine, any 5-year-old can tell you the difference between a dog and a cat, right? But if you really have to describe the difference between a dog and a cat, it's very subtle. There's no one thing that will tell you that's a dog or that's a cat. But any 5-year-old can kind of make that distinction because they built a schema in their mind, a very effective schema, to basically disentangle the two. Some schema are causality, basically events, chains of causality. You've all been to many, many restaurants, and in your mind you have this pattern that you might expect when you go into a restaurant. Now, not every one of these things is always going to happen when you go into a restaurant, but it's a rough framework that you built, a schema for dealing with that situation. Now, advertising is really based around the idea of false schema, that if you drink a lot of beer, pretty women will be attracted to you. In reality, something like that, or actually that's a more accurate schema. But advertising really is bombarding you with images all the time, trying to get you to build the wrong schema. Now, kids, when they interact with things, they love to play over and over, and repetition is one of the ways in which they are kind of building these schema. And they're looking at the results of these repetitive things. When a kid builds a tower of blocks, knocks it over, builds it again, knocks it over. And they're always refining their internal model based upon that. There was this great story I heard a while back, this guy that would buy M&Ms, and he loved M&Ms, and what he would always do is he would open the pack and he would take out 2 M&Ms and squeeze them evenly between his 2 fingers until one of them broke. And then he'd eat the one that broke and keep the other one, and then he'd pull another one out of the pack and do it again and again. And so it was like this kind of cumulative death match type thing. Now, at the end, he would have one M&M that had survived all the kind of matches. He would put that in an envelope and mail it back to the company with a little note saying to be used for free. Somebody in the company eventually realized this. He'd been doing it for years, and then they sent him a lifetime supply of M&Ms. So I got rewarded for that behavior. But I think kids, when they're doing play experiences, this is very much what's going on in their head. They have these established schema, they're testing it against new ones all the time, throw away the one that doesn't work, improve, take the best one. We're always doing this, even as adults we're doing this without even realizing it. And we collect these schema in totally different areas and build them into larger and larger models that we build in the world. Conceptual models, and then we start stacking all these different conceptual models together to build, whole world models around this. If you imagine a kid just kind of playing with a toy train, all the different schema and patterns and conceptual models that they're extracting from this simple artifact. A kid will be learning about wheels and axles and the way that things roll, about the way they go into the little grooves of the rails and follow the track, all the different ancillary accessories that might be attached to that toy experience. At the same time, they're kind of learning that this is a character, Thomas, that might appear in a 2-dimensional linear narrative, or in a 3D video, or whatever. Plus, this train actually represents a real class of objects that you might go out in the world and see, that actually come in, myriad different forms. All these are different kind of branching models that the kid is learning out of that one interactive experience. I was looking at, for some reason the other day, these linear accelerators, and these were physicists are smashing together atoms and learning how, basically matter works. And I kept thinking they reminded me of something, and it finally dawned on me that they were Hot Wheels tracks. And they had the exact same accelerator, and basically, if you look at all the new Hot Wheels sets, they're all about smashing the cars into each other at high speed until they fly apart. And so, in some sense, kids are smashing these cars to find out what the constituent parts of the cars are. And it's exactly the same thing they're doing, kind of in a toy environment. And I think, as we build models, as we get older, our models get more and more accurate. There's one kind of theory of psychology that says that we're totally tearing down our world models at very early ages and rebuilding them from scratch up until around the age of 4 years old, at which point we pretty much have our final world model and we're just refining it from that point on, which is one of the reasons why most of us don't have many, really coherent memories before 4 years old, because the memories are built in reference to the world model. And if we're tearing apart the world models and throwing it away, the memories get lost with it. And so at 4 years old is the first time we really kept our final world model, and so our earliest memories can basically survive from that point on. So, but we're building models at all different levels through our play experiences. The physical level, chemistry, biology, sociology. Our play experiences are basically, diverse in the same way the world is diverse, and they're nested, and then we start learning kind of different models of the world at different scales all over. And some of these models, eventually we learn this ability for model making, to where we can take it into things like symbolism. We can kind of take historical events and symbolically kind of put them into models. Sometimes it's about simplicity, perception. This is a very simple little picture showing that if you took all the water in the world and put it into one sphere, it would be the size of that drop on the left. If you took all the atmosphere, one pressure, around the planet Earth, and put it into a sphere, it would be the size of the one on the right. And it gives you a very direct, intuitive understanding of this thing, that you can look at all the numbers in the world, and you wouldn't have that instinctual understanding, without a model like this. Other ones are complexity. There's this strange Canadian woman that started building these models of unexplained murder scenes. And she would basically, study the news pages. Anytime there was an unsolved murder that had been around for 10 years, she would make this detailed, incredible recreation of that murder scene. And to the point where criminologists would actually go to her little museum of all these dioramas and study them for clues. She had every clue that was found by the police in these scenes. But here it was a way of complexity, and really the criminologists would use this and they would, say, what's your theory for what happened here? And so these models were things that were meant to kind of extract the complexity of the world into a model situation where people could theorize on top of it. Some models are really about vision of the future. One of my favorite rides at Disney World was always the People Mover, which is the only ride at Disney World with no line. It's this simple little thing you get in, it kind of rolls around at 2 miles an hour. Linear induction motor, which is really cool in an engineering sense, but if you don't know what a linear induction motor is, you just won't give a shit about it. But it actually used to go through, it doesn't anymore, it used to go through this dark area near Space Mountain where there was this wonderful model of Disney's version of Epcot Center. But actually Epcot. Epcot was originally supposed to be the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. It wasn't supposed to be kind of this corporate pavilion that it turned out to be. He wanted to actually build a real city with all these futuristic technologies that Disney would run. And after he died, they decided it just wasn't practical, they didn't do it. But that model of his vision of the future was just really striking to me. And I remember as a kid going through there and seeing that it sparked my imagination. I started building models, and my fascination with city building, for instance. So we basically have this process that we're going through as we interact with our play experiences, where we take examples and we bring them up to metaphors, we start detecting patterns that we see, we start building abstractions, which are schema on top of that, and then models based upon multiple schema, which allow us to predict the world around us, and then can alter our behavior relative to that world. A lot of the experiences that we're dealing with, too, kind of fall on these two axes. This is just yet another perspective that I use in thinking about interactive experiences, is that we have this kind of division between social, individual, things that are about you or things that are about others. For instance, web surfing is a very individual experience, and it's really about the world. It's not so much about you. Something like The Sims is really an individual experience. That's about you, if you put yourself in the game as an avatar. We have multiplayer games that are really more social experiences, but still you're at the center of them. Other ones that are social experiences where we're all sitting back and watching Star Wars. It's not about us. But we also have synchronous and asynchronous. Social networking really, and a lot of the games are about you and social. Wikipedia, asynchronous, social, about the world. I think that in general, I'm seeing a lot of the entertainment trends kind of moving toward this upper right quadrant. Games that are centered around you in very social experiences. Internet usage, of course, is getting very ubiquitous around the world. And as a result of that, I think that we are starting to establish this connection within our communities, with our friends, etc., that's almost getting spooky. It's just amazing when you think of the amount of data that we are sharing with our friends on a moment-to-moment basis. We've had the ability for a while to make these kind of shared virtual worlds, which in some sense, we are taking things from our imagination, actually manifesting them in a way that other people can see, and then collaboratively build with us. So for the first time, we can collaboratively build these imaginary worlds that used to be kind of the area of individual artists.